All right, it looks like people are still filtering in, but Jeff, do you want to get us started? And as we kind of move through introductions, hopefully everyone will be able to join us.
Yes, let's go ahead and get ourselves started. So good evening, everybody. I'm Jeff Rogers, Executive Director of the Berkshire Museum, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all here to tonight's live, if virtual, discussion, Our Own Words, the importance of sharing stories in these unprecedented times, as well as the public premiere of the virtual exhibition, Their Stories, Oral Histories from the NAACP. I just have to share a little background. It was back in early 2019, which seems like a century ago, that I was interviewing for my position with the Berkshire Museum. And one of the first things that I saw as I explored the museum was the Their Stories exhibition on the museum's second floor. And I was stopped in my tracks by Julie McCarthy's stunning photographs, and I proceeded to read and listen to the stories that were presented. And it really was a defining moment for me. The experience showed me first that this was a museum that I really wanted to be associated with, but perhaps more importantly, that this was a community that I wanted to be a part of. So before we get started, I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Magdalene Adams, Churchill Cotton, Ray Gunn, Mabel Hamilton, Dennis Powell, Reverend Charles Pratt, Evelyn Pratt, Shirley Edgerton, Will Singleton, and Gwendolyn Van Sant. You had an impact on me that you didn't know that you had. And thank you all for offering your voices and stories that have also impacted thousands of others who have heard them. I'd like to thank Dennis Powell and everybody at the NAACP Berkshire County branch for all that you did to make this exhibition a reality and for sharing your stories so that others might learn from them. And I'd also like to thank Judith Monachina for her work in documenting these stories and saving them for us forever. Her work with the Housatonic Heritage Oral History Center at the Berkshire Community College sits behind everything that we're going to see tonight. On the museum side, I'd like to recognize the work of William Dorr, who created this virtual exhibition that I expect will have a positive impact on thousands of more people now that we have it in this virtual format, and to Craig Langlois, who was instrumental in bringing together the original exhibition, this virtual exhibition, and the program that we're here for tonight. And I want to thank all of you. There's more than 100 of you joining us tonight for a discussion about the importance of sharing stories in these oh so unprecedented times. So now, with those thanks, I'll turn it over to you, Craig, to get us started. Craig Langlois.
Thanks, Jeff, and welcome everyone. And before we begin tonight's panel discussion, I'm just going to take a few minutes to explain what's currently on your screen. Over the past few months, we've been painstakingly building a complete virtual version of the Berkshire Museum. And what you're looking at right now is a 2-scale digital environment where the museum can create experiences. As Jeff mentioned, tonight we're debuting the digital version of the museum's 2019 exhibition, Their Stories, Oral Histories from the NAACP. After tonight's panel discussion, you'll be able to access this exhibition in a few different formats. The first is the version you see. This is a space you can navigate just like a video game. The arrow keys on your keyboard will move you around, and your mouse is used to pan the room. In this gallery, as you approach a portrait on the wall, you'll hear the same 2 to 3 minute snippet of the interviewee story that was part of the original exhibition. And I want to take just a moment to demonstrate. So if I hit H on my keyboard, you should see on the bottom of the screen the controls that we can use to sort of navigate. I can step forward, I can step to the side, I can move backwards. My mouse will allow me to pan. And if I head over to Shirley.
Do you see this sign? Entry of no return.
As you get close to
That's where the slaves walked out of and were placed on those boats. Okay? Those were your ancestors.
So that's one way. The second is we have created a video tour of this exhibition. If this feels a little daunting to you in terms of navigation, all you would need to do is hit play and let the video be your guide. And it'll take you through each of the oral histories as well as the timeline in the center of the exhibition. And the last way I want to share is the landing page we have built on explore.berkshiremuseum.org. Here, you can navigate each one of the oral histories independently. You can also navigate through the timeline simply by clicking. This webpage is completely mobile friendly. The video tour is completely mobile friendly, and we're working on getting the interactive tour that we're using tonight to be mobile friendly as well. At the end of tonight's panel discussion, both the interactive 3D tour, the web landing page, and as well as the pre-recorded virtual tour will be available for you to access at any point.
Amazing.
All right. Okay, so let's begin tonight's event. And it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Judith Monachina, Director of the Housatonic Heritage Oral History Lab at Berkshire Community College. Judith is also the interviewer for all the oral histories featured here. Judith, in just a second, I'm going to hand it over to you, but I wanted to mention that if you have a question for the panel, please use the chat function. If we have time at the end, I'll bring those questions to the panel. And finally, once the discussion begins, I'll be dropping off the camera, but slowly navigating through the exhibition. Again, thanks for everyone for taking the time for joining us tonight. With that pleasure, please welcome tonight's moderator, Judith Monachina. Welcome, Judith.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, Jeff, for saying all of the names. That was a very special way to start this, this talk by giving all of the names. We will see all of the pictures, but it's nice to hear the names. And I'd also like to add that Len Cates, who's also on the screen here, this couldn't have happened without Len. And you'll hear more about how that is. It was Len who got this all started. So, and we'll hear about that. So first, I thought we would talk a little about the Oral History Project, and then about the exhibition, and then finally, but very soon, about storytelling and what we can do with it now. So I'm going to start with some questions. I'm going to ask you, Len. You came to me at Berkshire Community College before we even had an Oral History Center, before Housatonic Heritage, our parent organization, and BCC, our hosts, decided on the form of the center. You came to my office, and you, do you remember why you wanted to do this and what you were thinking when you approached my little office there on the campus?
I do. It's something I won't forget. We were having a monthly meeting of the chapter, Berkshire County Branch NAACP, and one of my fellow members mentioned that there were a number of people in the community and in the chapter who were getting older, and they had interesting information and stories for us. Maybe an oral history would be something to do. And I said, I'll do it. Mm-hmm. And that's how it began. Mm-hmm. And there was the usual kind of constructive and cohesive and collaborative discussion that the branch has as branch meetings. That at point, I believe I gave out my email address, if not soon after, and said, if anyone knows anybody who could be on the list as potential interviewees, please let me know. And again, at the end of the meeting, we milled around together, as often is the case, and I took names and phone numbers. And that was the beginning of forming the list. And I started sharing that list with the membership at our next meeting. Mm-hmm. The next thing I recall is talking about looking around for the opportunity to find equipment to do an oral history project. And one of our colleagues, one of our fellow members, Megan Weldon, mm-hmm. said, oh, there's a person, Judith Monachina, at Berkshire Community College, Housatonic Heritage. I grabbed it. I didn't know, but it made sense, and I called you. That's or something similar to that. And then the next thing I remember is we met up with Dan Polanani, the director. Well, I guess you and I met first up Wall
We
Street.
met a few times, if I remember correctly, yeah.
And then I know there was the meeting with you and Dan. And the ball got rolling, and in that ball getting rolling, you said to me something about a roll call stewards. And I didn't know about that. And you explained people who would be supportive and keep an eye on the project and help me along. And at that point, I believe I also heard you speak about the importance of you coming to an executive committee meeting to talk about the project. So those things started happening. If you want, I can identify now or hold off who the stewards were and what they did for the project.
Yeah, I think in a minute I'm going to ask you about the list, and I think the stewards that's where the stewards will come in.
Sure.
I know that we went to that executive committee meeting, and Dennis was leading the meeting, and the committee was there. The stewards were there by then, I think. And then, so Len, you had this list. How did you select the list? It was a very big list.
How did I select?
Yeah, how did you all come up with this list?
As I said, at the very first meeting that came out, and I said, I'll do a project for us. I asked for names, and I started writing them down. And after the meeting, milling around, getting some more names, then I started organizing my program file. So I made my first typed list, and I brought it to another meeting and read it, and people added, subtracted. By that time, you had spoken about stewards.
Right.
And so I asked people who might be interested in being stewards. And there were 4 people who came up, Linda LaHolt, Cynthia Pease, Dr. Francis Jones, and I'm leaving someone out. God, it's...
You'll think of her. You'll think of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And from that moment on, I started communicating by email with the stewards regularly, sending, in this instance, you asked about the lists, I sent them the lists and said, would you look this over? Would you make corrections, recommendations, additions, and so on? And from then on to the end of the project, I would bounce that list back and forth with them. It would indicate this person was interviewed,
right?
Know anyone else, and that's how that list was maintained and developed throughout the project.
So at some point, we started doing the interviews, and just to give people a sense of when it all happened, the very first interview was Maggie Adams, and Maggie was a former president of the chapter, and we pre-interviewed her. There was a pre-interview meeting just before the election in 2016, and then our actual interview was just after the election in 2016, and so the world had changed between those 2 meetings. It was quite something. And and I want to mention that Wendy Germain, who is maybe listening, was at every interview recording the conversations. That's a big job. She recorded the conversations and did it really well, and it helped to have someone there. She even picked me up with a flat tire one time to bring me to an interview. But anyway, often a BCC student was there too. And with Dennis's interview, we had a young woman in the room helping Wendy, learning how to do this too. So to Dennis, your interview came pretty soon at the beginning. And can you say what it's like to be interviewed?
Well, it was really amazing because, and I think this goes to this whole concept of storytelling. One really doesn't realize how much memory they retain I mean, I could literally close my eyes and see the places that I was speaking to you about. The train station, living over the Busy Bee restaurant, even the gentleman who had a little too much spirit and thought he was going into a bar, but ended up coming up into our apartment and opened the door, and my grandmother, we were taking our bath in the galvanized tub that they put in the kitchen, middle of the kitchen floor. And remembering that back then, the cleanest child took a bath first.
That's great.
And the dirtiest child was last, because they decided that no one should have to wash up in the dirtiest child's mud that might have left behind. So, but when the door opened, we screamed, and my grandmother come running out, and it was a guy that was drunk, and she chased him down the stairs with a mop and ended up throwing the mop at him. And to this day, we never saw the mop. So,
And you know what? That's not even in your interview.
I'm sorry.
We'll have to do that one again. We'll have to do it again. That's a good story.
But see, this is what happens when, I was surprised at the comfortability doing the interview.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really felt that, and I think this is important for the person conducting, I really felt that everyone was listening, allowing me to tell the story, not interrupting, and it was, and if you remember correctly, it got a little, I mean, we were in tears, even the student, who I really felt bad for, but I guess that's part of what storytelling is about too. And it allowed me to really feel comfortable in opening up and telling my story. And so, yeah,
You were very open. You were very honest and very open. That's brave.
But I think because you created that space for honesty and allowed me to go deep within my thoughts and express them. I think I remember saying to you, I always said I wanted to write a book. And unlike most people, the title doesn't come first, but I had the title. I just haven't put any words to it. And the title was, If Only This Was Fiction.
Yeah.
And it was going to be about my life.
Yeah.
And what I experienced.
Yeah.
So, yeah, storytelling is just amazing. And there were good times, there were happy times, and there were sad times. And it all comes through when you're given the opportunity to have that safe space, and this should be a lesson to everyone, especially when we're dealing with our youth and our youth are talking. Allow them to have that space, allow them to open up, allow them to release, and just listen. And this is what storytelling really is all about. I was sort of laughing because I'm going to be talking about storytelling tomorrow down in the Great Barrington for at the triplex for the weekend that we have planned. And I was laughing. I was saying, remember, tell me a story, tell me a story, tell me a story, and then I'll go to bed. So storytelling has always been something that even as a child, we wanted that.
Yes.
We look for that. And so, and then I look at just the African heritage. It was the elders who maintained the history of the family or tribe, and they carried on generation to generation. There was always one storyteller in that village.
Mm-hmm.
It would give everyone the history
Mm-hmm.
of the village and the people that made it possible and whatnot. So yeah, it's powerful, and it's something that every community should really have, that, because when we can, I mean, this exhibit alone that just talks about people that grew up in this community, and to have it in our museum
Mm-hmm.
is so powerful, you know. And it's something that my granddaughter didn't even realize the exhibit was up. Her school class had taken them to the museum, and one of her girlfriends comes over to her and she says, "Madison, I think that's your grandfather over there." So yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I want to ask you a question that has haunted me since the beginning of the project, and you know that because I talked with you about it. Was the fact that the interviewer was white, what do you think that how would that have impacted the interview?
Well, one, I think because I'm telling a story that you're not really familiar with, so there wasn't this, well, let me interject this, let me interject that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I don't know if I could be the interviewer and interview a Black person, because I've lived probably so much of the story that they're going to be telling.
I see.
And I think I would be interrupting more. I mean, you were and especially the student intern, I mean, she was hearing something that she never even imagined could exist. You know, so there was just this dead silence in the room, and you just let me go like I was a recorder. And I think I think that can say a lot. Now, I'm not saying that there probably isn't Black people that can do that. I'm just saying I don't think I could do it.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes there are some stories that I might not recognize and might not be able to pull if I don't recognize that they're stories. I mean, I think that there's disadvantages and advantages. We do the best we can, and I always felt funny about it, but we talked about it, and so we continued through these 10 interviews, and I know that I did the best I could. And it was an amazing experience. Every time Len and I were in the room, and Wendy, and every time people left, we would say, wow, we are so blessed. We used that word, which we don't often use in our daily lives, I think, but it felt like such a gift. And we're going to talk a little bit more about your interview. I want to read a quote from an essay and then go to your interview itself. Craig is going to walk us over to the clip, but I want to read this quote. It was a quote that was given in a class recently that I took by the teacher is Nissa Chow, and the quote is James Baldwin, an essay published in Esquire in 1960. And it says, "There is a housing project standing now where the house in which I grew up once stood. And one of those stunted city trees is snarling where the front door used to be. So Nissa Chow talked about embodied knowledge, our knowledge, what we know in our bodies. We walk around with it, we decide things with it. We don't know it much of the time, but it's what we have and it's what we bring to an interview. And the safe space and the interviewer that can make a safe space can sort of help that embodied knowledge come forward. And I'm wondering if Craig could walk us over to Dennis's interview right now, and we could hear something similar to James Baldwin's words about his own neighborhood. And then we can talk about
Around
that.
7, maybe 7, 8. That's when I had my first job. I was playing outside the Busy Bee restaurant, and someone was going in, and I was right by the door, so I grabbed the doorknob and pulled the door open, and they gave me a quarter. I stood there all day, refused to leave. All 4 pockets were full of coins. We actually lost 4 neighborhoods because there was West Street, and there was houses on both sides of West Street. Then there was Mill Street, and at this end of Mill Street, as you go under the bridge, the railroad bridge there over by the supermarket, that street was called Satinette Street. Then there was the river, Housatonic River, and then Deering Street, where a lot of Italians lived on Deering Street with wonderful gardens, and the gardens were always by the river. I remember one of the Italian guys used to literally water his garden when the sun went down from a bucket from the river. He had a rope, and he'd put the bucket in there and hoist it up, and he'd just go from plant to plant. We used to sit on the steps and watch him. It would be impossible in our neighborhood for any kid to get snatched because there was always someone sitting out on the porch. You couldn't walk 2 houses without someone saying, "Does your mother know you're down here?" And we all had gardens. And we as kids used to sit on the steps as our parents sat on the porches. Clap Park, used to go there every Friday night, take our blankets because they had movies every Friday night. I think when they tore down all that, it broke up neighborhoods, which were really always the support groups. Both sides of West Street were completely full with restaurants all the way down the hill. At the bottom of West Street was this beautiful train station. And they really didn't like us kids that lived in the area because we used to open that door and yell in there, and our echo would last for about 15 minutes. Also, there was a beautiful park, and I mean beautiful park. Trees, grass, benches. People used to come there and take their lunch. We as kids played in that park. And I remember all the restaurants were packed all the time. The hotel at the time, which was at the top of the hill, that too was a beautiful building. I remember my grandfather, who was a porter at that hotel, they used to come down to the train station and pick up the bags and carry them up the hill to the hotel. I think I was around 7, maybe 7, 8. That's when I had my first job. I was playing.
Yep, that's it. That's it. That's it. It's so good. It's such a picture that, just like the James Baldwin quote about his house, the door, the tree, the picture of the streets and the park. I'm wondering, I also want to mention that Erica Spiz is the one who did the editing on these, and she did a great job of editing. We see Julie's portraits, you see so much work here. But I'd like to ask even the 3 of us really, why would this story be important? Why why would this story be an important story for listeners, say children, say adults, anyone in the region or anywhere? Any ideas?
I have a thought going through my mind. Somewhere in the last year, maybe I'm off a bit, a book came out about caste in American society.
Right.
And it speaks to the racial caste system in America and how people who were considered by that system to be lower and not higher had little say-so in what went on in urban planning in their neighborhoods. And it could turn a life topsy-turvy. And when I hear again Dennis, you tell that story, I'm reminded of the caste system, which still exists in America, as we know, in relationship to perceived differences between what we call white people. I like to say peach people, but white people, black people, brown people. So that's what I think of.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Anything, Dennis?
Well, as I have always mentioned, you know, this sort of goes along with what Len is saying. This really, the destruction of these communities and families really was, to me, I always called it the incubator for institutional racism.
Mm-hmm.
Because it clearly destroyed that family that government knew was the support mechanism, was the support group. I mean, we had, everyone on our street had a garden.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't have to plant everything in that garden because we all shared what we planted.
Mm-hmm.
And that utilized that space, you know, and all of that was just destroyed. I mean, as I said, we were comfortable. My mother worked and she never had to worry about what was happening to us because there were so many people in that neighborhood who sat on their porch.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked out for you. And they were also your disciplinarian. I mean, that was back in the day where it was not uncommon for a neighbor to give you a tap on the butt and send you home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that can never be done today. You can't even tap your own child on the butt and send them home. But but there was this level of respect. Pardon me?
No, go ahead. No.
Yeah. Yep. No, there was this level of respect that was automatically created, you know, where we did things for the elders in our community. And when they said something to you, you responded. I mean, I even tell the story of the police officers when I was growing up. I mean, I literally looked for a police officer when I would walk home from the boys' club just because I knew I would be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, kids today don't grow up with that. I mean, I grew up in an era where police officers actually knew my name, sometimes to my detriment, because they also knew my parents, and had no problem letting them know when I was out of line. It was just more community.
Right.
You know, sharing and people, you know, the West Side community was the immigrant community.
Yeah.
You know, it really was. And we had the Italian bakeries and the Polish butcher shops and you know, the gathering, which this was the first year we weren't able to host it because of COVID. But
Yeah.
that started out with everyone gathering in Pitt Park, which is now Durant Park, and bringing their ethnic foods
Oh, wow.
and sharing, and it was just like a neighborhood block party, probably one of the original block parties,
Right, right.
you know, and everybody just shared and played, and so it was just a different world.
Yeah. I think, you know, when kids know, the more kids know about that sort of thing, and also that there was a prosperous period of time that that street and that train station and all that represents, that places are not always what they are, were not always what they are now. And to hear the stories of what they were, in this case, a train station that your grandfather walked down to and brought luggage to the hotel. That's a scene you don't see now in Pittsfield, you know. And, you know, I remember my father talking about taking the train from Lee, that same train station, to go to a movie that wasn't playing in his own theater. And the train would run, but it wasn't running at 11 when the movie got out, so he'd take a bus home. To know these stories, that there were buses after 11 o'clock at night running through our county, I think that's important for us to know. That, and anyway, so just for memory's sake, it seems to me that, just for memory's sake, and like, I guess that's what you're saying. And also to sort of help us understand what's sort of just and what's not just. I mean, the whole idea of urban renewal, maybe someone will become curious about that and do some research based on what they learned from your testimony, from your interview.
The young ladies that from UMass that did the
Yes,
project for us,
yes,
well, I took them on a tour
yes,
to help them to have vision to work on their project, and I took them on a tour of
yes,
that whole area and showed them where the houses were that I was talking about,
yeah,
and showed them how 4 streets were literally destroyed and whatnot. And that's what helped them really envision. And went to Big Y and told them this is where the train
right,
station was, and right
right,
across was this beautiful park. So it was,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, and Rachel and Helen, their work is on our website, and I think it's on your website too, the Oral History Center and the NAACP. And so they did a beautiful sort of first version of a virtual exhibit.
Right.
This is the more elaborate type, but they did a lot of work, and they worked with Craig, I know, to do that. I'm wondering also, I mean, a lot of storytelling, listening to your story, for example, about your work. A lot of people are using it. We're using it with a couple of different schools, using oral history to help students hear about people's workplaces and work. You were a chef. Hearing about how you became a chef. That can be inspiring and interesting and educational too. I mean, storytelling like that, for that purpose, is a lot of teachers are using oral history for that right now. Yesterday I was talking with Alyssa Del Tufo. You may remember her, Dennis, because she gave a talk on oral history and social justice at BCC. She does oral history, she goes in backwards. She does it for the purpose of social change. So social change is the purpose, oral history is the method. So we were talking about how community event based on this knowledge might be interesting, you know, how when we can gather again. Having a community event with projected images and storytelling could help kids understand their environment a little bit better. And then what? You know, then maybe they become stewards. Maybe then they, you know, the more they know, it seems to me, the more people know, the more they care. Also empathy. I wondered if Craig could walk over to Churchill Cotton. If you can hear it, Churchill, we'll listen for a minute. The sound, Churchill's voice was a little soft. And you're getting there, and you're getting there, and you're getting there. But this first story that Churchill tells is so compelling.
Here, my mother volunteered me. And, you know, she would always say, you know, you're a pastor, you know, you're the pastor's son, so people are watching you. You have to behave accordingly. I used to eat lunch in the school cafeteria, but there was a white girl that they become friends. And I think it was like 4th grade. Her name was, I still remember her name. Her name was Loretta Staller. And she said she invited me home for lunch. And we had lunch, and I remember her mother called Loretta into the kitchen and said, you know, you shouldn't have brought him here. She said, we don't do that in this house. So I knew what she was talking about. That's why, you know, it became obvious to me that, you know, prejudice is taught. Kids play and get along, they get along fine. But when adults get involved in it, that's when all these prejudice ideas and thoughts come about. My dad was very active in civil rights. We had Martin Luther King come to his church in 65, and he spoke. The church at this time was in the middle of a Chicago project called Cabrini Greens, which was a tough neighborhood. So it was an exciting time. When I was like 12, I was thinking about being a minister. And then when I became 15, that was kind of like the turning point. I knew I could never have the dedication to the ministry that he had. Around that time, I was starting to develop, you know, my philosophy of life and, you know, what myself. So the Bible was a big influence because of my dad's. There's a poem by Rudyard Kipling called "If." I memorized that at the time, and I thought that kind of had an impact. You know, if you keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blame it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you and make allowances for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, being lied about, don't deal in lies, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. That was the first verse, and that had an impact. You know, if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. You know, if you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, or talk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither friend nor loving foe can hurt you, if all men count but none too much. You know, so I started to live those kind of things. Anytime there was some youth and they need a youth volunteer.
Okay, I think that's the beginning again. Yeah.
And you know, she would always say, you know, you're a pastor, you know, you're the pastor's son.
At 15. So at 15, I started my college career and came up to the Berkshires. I loved it.
Oh, we got somebody else. So, yeah, so harnessing this form to tell stories, for empathy, for social progress, for just I think when we connect two people for storytelling, we learn and we know each other better. You know, on May 25th, 2020, we saw something. We saw a murder, and we started to listen. We started to listen more. White people started to listen more. We started to hear. And we can continue to do this. We can continue to use the real stories that have been around. We can listen to these stories. We can tell each other stories too, and really try to hear what's been going on with people that we haven't been hearing. We have been turning away from. Also in isolation, this can help us join and feel less isolated, I think. I also think, Dennis, you have something going on with the NAACP. There's the W.E.B. Du Bois, the reading. Is that an NAACP thing going on?
It's actually a Clinton church.
Okay.
Dr. Francis Jones Sneed
Right.
has put together this just amazing group of scholars.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to start reading The Souls of Black Folk on October 13th. And you can go to the Clinton Church website and get the link and all the information. I mean, this is really, really powerful. I believe, didn't Housatonic Heritage,
Yeah.
they did the reading of
Yeah.
Black Reconstruction.
Oh, Black Reconstruction. Black Reconstruction. Right. Right. That's Meary Park. It's still going on. It will be
Yes.
going on through the election.
Right.
Yeah, there's so much going on, and it's all stories.
If I could just say something, you know, that's the first time I heard Church's story. And it's so real when he talks about hate being a taught behavior.
Yeah.
You know, because I guess that was his Guess Who's Coming to Dinner before they even made the movie.
Right. Right.
You know,
right. I'm glad we were also sitting in front of Mabel Hamilton's quote there, which is really, there's some amazing people in this exhibit.
Yeah.
I hope everybody gets to visit virtually here. And I just, yeah, I hope that I'm going to talk about something a little bit off subject for 1 second before we wind up. There's a famous old novel, like 500 years old, by Giovanni Boccaccio called The Decameron. And it was about young people escaping the plague in Florence and going off to a villa to escape. And they spend their time telling stories. And so I think of that a lot during this time, about how we are escaping to our villas, and we're telling each other stories, and we now have this, so we don't have to be in the same villa. We can be in our own apartments, and there's Maggie. Yeah, I hope we all pass our time doing that sort of thing right now. And Housatonic Heritage Oral History Center is there to help with projects. NAACP has an amazing lineup of events coming up. I got the email the other day, and I thought, I can't do half of this and still work. But it's impressive. So I wonder if we could just end by listening to Shirley. It's such an upbeat story. And it's about Shirley's a real activist, Shirley Edgerton. She works with youth, and she was supposed to be here tonight, but she had an urgent family matter. She was going to be on our panel. So, Shirley.
African Americans, and they were able to say the words. I mean, they really had internalized it. And it just, you know, it was like, I'm sitting in like, yep, this is it. You know, this is it. So first we started Youth Alive, Performance Arts.
Right.
Okay. And that came out of the church. We started the Rites of Passage and Empowerment program 6 years ago for girls, because we recognized that they needed something from the boys where they were totally focused on themselves. So we created this holistic program. And when we mean holistic, we mean spiritual, find all of it. You know, all of their being. When we went to South Africa 2 years ago, there were a couple of the young ladies that had serious issues with being there. Because you'll have some young people now, African American, I'm not African. You know, they'll quickly tell you that. So just to see that transition that these young women went through, you know, having to acknowledge history, because we took them to the slave castle. You can't deny this, folks. Do you see this building? Do you see this sign? Entry of no return. That's where the slaves walked out of and were placed on those boats. Okay? Those were your ancestors. Do you understand this? We took them first to Durban, They loved it. We were on the beach. We stayed in a very nice hotel. They shopped. They did all the tourist things.
Yeah.
Okay. We took them to all the tourist sites and
Yeah.
the big, beautiful city, the night lights. We wanted them to see the difference in lifestyles. Okay. And how most of the people were living. So we loaded them up in the van that Monday morning, rode out to Ilovo, farm country. They could see the shanty towns. It's out in the country or in the bush. It's very basic living, So as we left the big city, the kids began to see the differences in the community. And they were like, where are we going? I said, we're going to the orphanage. So I continued my work with the girls. And then we had each of our young ladies to choose a task. So myself and the nurse, we worked in the field because they had a large garden, which they ate out of. So we worked in the field. We had some of the girls who volunteered to work in the daycare center. Others worked in the school setting, whatever they chose to do. When they made their presentation, there were some of us that cried because they talked about their transition and they were able to talk about being proud of who they are. They were able to talk about the history of the African Americans and they were able to say the words. I mean, they really had internalized it. And it just, it was like, I'm sitting in like, yep, this is it. This is it. So first we started Youth Alive.
Thank you. That's it. That's it for Shirley's. By the way, there are full interviews also. UMass is our archiving partner, and they're on the Oral History Center website and on the NAACP website, linked to the UMass archive. So anything else we want to add before we pull in questions, Dennis and Len?
No, I just think, I want to really thank the Berkshire Museum for having the vision to redirect what museums are about and making them so community friendly. So, yeah.
Thank you. I agree, and for creating this beautiful exhibit. And someone asked for URLs, and I think rather than say URLs, we'll probably, maybe we have a list, Craig, and we can send the URLs of the NAACP, the Oral History Center, the related organization, the Clinton Church. We'll figure out how to get you that information.
Yep, Judith, anyone who registered for this event, we have an email and we can send out all of those links via the registration form.
Fantastic. That's great. Do you want to field any questions, Craig? Are there any questions for people have? Or?
If you have a question for the panel, please feel free to add it to the chat. Judith, at the moment, currently just lots of praise.
Yeah, I see. It's lovely. I'm so glad. Thank you all for being here. So many names I do not know. I'm seeing the chat pop up. And it's just really, really lovely that you've spent this time, this Friday evening, as it begins to get dark, spent time with us. Thank you. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, museum.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Jeff Rogers, do you want to take us out real quick?
I just wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Len. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Craig, for guiding us through this virtual world. And thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. I echo Judith. I think it was a powerful evening. And come back, go listen to the full interviews. Come visit the virtual exhibition, listen to the stories, and let them impact you the way they've impacted so many already, and share them with folks that you think need to hear them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
And with that, I think we're saying good night.
Night.
Thank you all.
Be safe.
Yes.
Good night,
Be well.
everybody.
Leave meeting.